Welcome back to the podcast. I am Dave, and sitting next to me is Rob, and also sitting next to me is Neil before Zod.
Hi, how's it going?
Neil is our Trexpert. He is here for this Trek-heavy episode where we are going to take a crack at one of the interesting philosophical discussions involving high technology in our current society. What would change? What would be different? How would our society be affected if the technology for Star Trek's Holodeck were here and present in our current society? So to bring this to a fair conversation, a couple of disclaimers have to go out first of all. Number one, we are going to address this from as technical a standpoint as we can. We have references, we have notes, and we have Neil. So we expect to give a fairly good whack at an intellectual discussion about what the holodecks can and can't do, and discuss all of the ramifications of it. One or more of those subjects, however, may drift into material that may be considered maturely themed. No, we are not suddenly going to be, using language other than what you've expected, but some of the stuff we're going to talk about may go into adult things. If you are sensitive to these things, or you are a little too young to be listening to it, this might not be the episode for you. So, our goal for this is to discuss a variety of topics, primarily centered on that holodeck thing. One of the most exciting things in science fiction that has kind of come to life, caught a lot of people's imaginations. And if we had what we have seen on various shows from Star Trek, the movies, what have you, what it would be like. So first of all, let's set up a baseline for this discussion. And in order to do that, we need to have an idea of what you can do with a holodeck. For those of you who don't know, aren't as much into Star Trek, why don't you guys give us a description of what the holodeck is and again, what can it do?
It's a recreation center, essentially, from what we've seen mostly in Star Trek. They use it for their games, I guess you'd say. They're role-playing.
Oh, yes. We are going to curve this back to my genre, aren't we?
Yes, we very well could. They use it for their stories. It's almost like it's their, like kids today, or some adults, they're glued to their phones, and they're always just doing stuff through their phones, right? Well, in Star Trek, we've evolved beyond that, and then now we're actually going into rooms and having these holographic projections with photoreal, whatever it is that you are,
beyond photoreal.
Yeah,
it's
whatever it is.
Perceptible that it's not actually real.
Right. Whatever you want to do, you can do in this. In some cases, they also use it for like technical manuals in a way, to get into the deep of, okay, I need to fix something, so let's have this thing project, and then I can go look in at it from without
an exploded view, you can manipulate and see.
Like, instead of actually putzing around with the engine, because Star Trek has engine issues a lot, you could do the holographic projection room in the holodeck there and actually run through scenarios. Okay, if I do this, what will happen? Boom, dead. Okay, I can't do that. Let's do this. Nope, that doesn't work either. So you can do stuff like that. There's a couple other things I can't think of at the moment, but those seem to be the primary things that you see with the
I
holodecks.
would think one of the bigger aspects of it is medical imaging, in addition to engineering. But medical imaging is a technology just burgeoning even in our own society. But to be able to take apart a body without actually taking apart a body would be very
messy.
Advantageous. Well, it would be messy, yeah. But to be able to look inside a scanned individual in a sterilized setting other than actually cutting a person open would be very advantageous.
Okay. So primarily recreation and acquiring knowledge and information is pretty much what we've seen in the movies and the shows, right?
Yes.
Okay. So,
I would point out that
Yes.
that holographic technology is not copyrighted by Star Trek. There is other sci-fi that actually has touched upon holography. Not the least to mention is the show The Orville, which is about as close to Star Trek as you can get without being Star Trek. It's definitely not the sole domain of Star Trek to have holography, but it is something that has become a story mainstay within that genre, yes.
Actually, I can vouch that as early as even the 50s, in terms of hard science fiction literature, there were already speculations about hard light creations and 3D holographic imaging and things like that. It's certainly not new, and it's not the sole purview of Star Trek. However, the applications and bringing it to life before our eyes was never quite done the same way as Star Trek did it. They innovated in the process. They innovated in, using that technology to tell entire stories and episodes of the show based around this, fascinating idea. And I think a lot of the times in Star Trek, what we deal with is technology that is ultimately wish fulfillment. I mean, anybody who's played a video game could probably relate to, wow, I wish I could see this close up. I wish I could be this cool person. And that is a lot of what the holodeck is. It's not just a gymnasium where you can instantly do any sport you can think of. It's the ability to actually project yourself into a world of your own creation where things work out the way you want them to. So speaking of that, Neil, do we have hard facts? What is the holodeck as far as the technical side of it?
As far as in universe with Star Trek,
yes.
The technical aspect of it is holodecks are ultimately the culmination of several technologies coming together, not the least of which is replication technology. The ability to manipulate objects within a 3D setting.
No, when you say replication, you mean that not everything is just a 3D image and a force field to give it some weight.
Correct.
It actually is creating things
Correct.
in the space.
Correct.
How?
Transporter technology.
Okay.
Replication technology, which are all technologies that are used to taking various forms of matter, breaking them down into its subsequent energies, and then recreating them in a desired aspect. Let's say you create a room and you create a book in the room. You can grab that book. That book is an actual physical thing that's been replicated and can be removed from the holodeck. But let's say the table that it was on is purely holographic. That would not be able to be removed because that's being emitted from the holodeck.
So it's a holograph that's an overlay over a force field that is supporting the book, which is physical.
Correct.
And all of this can be done pretty much at the speed of thought by this super advanced technology.
Correct, which inherently just projects the idea that a large amount of computing capability is necessary to do this, something that is far beyond what we have today.
Oh, clearly.
I was gonna say so we could set up a room, a fancy, like, let's say, great view skyline Seattle, and you could order your food through the replicator system in the holodeck.
No. You would order your food from the holographic waiter,
right,
paying with replicated money, which has no value, but it's replicated, and you would have to wait because that is more realistic to wait for you so you can engage in conversation.
Computer, fast forward.
If the conversation tanks, you can fast forward. Too bad you can't do that in real life. And then food will be brought, which is real food, and it will taste exactly like the real food at the right temperature. And unless you have some reason to want to throw chaos into that, it'll be a perfect experience as you understand it every time.
That's why you'll see certain instances where, like, even in the first time we see the holodecks on The Next Generation, Wesley comes out and he's soaking wet. Well, the water was replicated, so the water is actually real. He leaves the holodeck, and that created environment doesn't come with him. But some of the replicated elements of that environment are obviously not being reconstituted into the energies that it came from. That being said, the lion's share of what happens in the holodeck is simply holographic technology, where photons, which photons are light particles that ordinarily do not have substance, that which we can articulate or basically touch, encased in force fields, which again is something that is far beyond our capacity nowadays. With those force fields in place and with those photonic beings, those photonic energies being used to create tables and chairs and other pieces of an environment, you're able to create a secondary environment aside from the environment in which we live. How you move in the environment, much like a treadmill where you're consistently walking. The treadmill is obviously imperceptible to you. Further,
so you
images.
always stay in the center of the room.
Essentially,
you are only moving relative to the other people in the room as far as it wants you to see.
correct.
And in that way, you never touch the walls.
Correct.
Any walls that you touch are going to be simulated.
There are times where you can touch the external portions of the holodeck. I've seen parts where, you can access the machinery of the holodeck while within a program.
That's usually because of some override or something that allows you
Correct.
to crash the...
Correct.
So you can see an emergency release or something?
Ultimately, that would be during an emergency situation where you would want to be able to crash the simulation. But ultimately, no, you would not ever reach the boundaries of the room. Anything you see off in the distance, whether it be meters or miles away, would likely be created through a forced perspective, much like Hollywood does today.
Sure.
Where they put smaller things in front of bigger things to make the smaller things seem even bigger.
Well, since you are dealing with massive manipulation of light, which is the way that we perceive through sight, a holodeck theoretically can make a person see anything it wants. Infinite distances.
Correct.
And so
Correct.
on and so forth.
And with the amount of computing power that you're talking about here, it would not be without the realm of reason to be able to create these kind of environments easily. Hollywood is adept at fooling an audience into believing what they see is real. It would not take a leap very far other than the computing power to do this in a setting in which we're talking a three-dimensional reality. We've touched upon that with VR, tactile responses. In terms of actual holography, they are working with touchable holography nowadays.
Really? I've seen it where you can interact with holograms, but you won't feel very much.
There is very new technology where between 4,000 and 200,000 pulses per second is actually projected against a spot, and you can actually have a tactile touch to it. So, I mean, it's not without the realm of reason for us to get to this technology, but we definitely have a lot to build upon.
Is that like that Minority Report stuff where they're doing the swiping the
or
thing?
Iron Man or CSI or...
Right? Is that...
Yeah, I would say that it would be more like with Iron Man or CSI, things like that is more scanning tools, understanding basically hand sign language and moving things and manipulating things. Simply, we have those today. We have smart boards that we're able to touch because it's scanning where our hand is going and it's manipulating. This would be more like say, a Black Panther, where they used technology to have three-dimensional renderings. You could pick up that three-dimensional rendering and manipulate it and look inside of it in more of a tactile response.
I saw this documentary about the sinking of the Titanic, one of the more current ones, where it looked like they had that room. It looked like a holodeck room almost in a way, and they photo scanned all the pieces that they found, because they found stuff since the movie came out 20 years ago, and so those missing pieces they were able to place back together, and then they just put the ship back together, and then they could determine how it sank because of the pieces, where they found them, where they found this and that. And it was like, I was watching that and I was like, wow, that's almost like a little holodeck room from Star Trek. And you had all the experts and the self-proclaimed expert James Cameron there, just sitting there doing all that stuff with the real experts, and then kind of saw how that came together and how it sank in this really fascinating looking room. But at the same time, I'm like, well, how much of that's just a special effect? Because they could just had those guys waving their arms around, but it looked like they're there putting all the stuff together, waving their arms around, and the ship came back together.
Like I said, Hollywood is quite good at making you believe what you see.
Also hand in hand with the ability to manipulate light and perceptions, also the perception of sound. Theoretically, you could have a number of people in the room and they'd be able to talk to each other even though they're only a few feet away from each other. It can apparently also alter sound perceptions too, similar ways. So that you could be in a concert experience, for instance, being hit and be able to close your eyes and still kind of pinpoint where different sounds are coming from and move around, and different people can have a different experience in the same
ultimately, that's why holodecks are for the most part, they are a confined environment, and the only way to be able to do that is to really have it in a confined environment. If you had externals, I mean, even today with concert halls and with
movie theaters,
or music studios where they're producing sounds and stuff like that, there is the necessity to keep what is outside so that you can keep what is inside. In terms of sound manipulation and direction, that's not an altogether difficult thing to come up with. When we have
it is spontaneously
sound
without any kind of visible speakers or anything.
Correct.
Though.
The caveat is that the computer system has enough AI to be able to do this on a massive scale amongst 1, 2, or a dozen people within the room. Ultimately, computing capacity is the ultimate technology needed to do this.
So ultimately, I think what we can understand, as we understand holodecks right now, without our personal experiences of just watching the show, is that it represents a perfect entertainment and multimedia device. Sounds about right?
Yep.
I don't suppose in any of those manuals you referenced, does it give a capacity on how many people can fit into one of these and have the experience? Or?
No, that I didn't really read up on. That has definitely been explored. The more you have, the larger the room you need to have. There was an episode of Voyager in which they tore down half of 3 decks in order to create a large enough holographic space to be able to have hundreds of people within the realm at a single moment in multiple areas. I believe they recreated World War II was one of them. And so you had a large contingent of people in there. And with the computing path, they couldn't run much anything else on the ship to be able to do that. But the more people you want in there, the larger the room has to be.
Okay.
That is definitely considered.
Interesting that you said that. Now, with all this amazing technology and the amazing experience they can generate, there are some limitations, some rather hard limitations in the technology. You need a vast amount of computing power. Presumably, you need a vast amount of raw power to generate all those force fields, to be able to control the light and everything like that, to be able to run the behind-the-scenes mechanisms that keep everybody in a place and running everything. So that's explored too, that it takes up a certain amount of... Obviously, there must be some sort of rationing, because with this being available, you would think, dang, I would try to get as much transporter time as possible, or holodeck time as possible. I'd be like, there'd be a black market for time that you can get into the holodeck.
Well, I ultimately, I think that has to do with the fact that you haven't seen it. We didn't see it in the original series, other than the fact that they probably didn't think about it. But if you really think about it, that technology could exist, but the ability to compact it and to put it on a starship would probably be cost prohibitive at that time.
Well,
so it's more like, would you have an arcade at the local city? Would you have an arcade full of holodecks? And you know, obviously Star Trek is a moneyless society, but in our society, would you pay to experience that? We have things like that.
Yes. Okay.
They could have had it a lot earlier, but Trip ruined it for everybody.
Well, I would think that simply because we didn't see it doesn't mean that it didn't exist. A lot of the times when we say a technology, it's beyond its burgeoning stage. It's already been tested, approved, and been in use for a long time. We just hadn't seen it yet. And I think while holodecks were amazing to the audience, I don't think it was necessarily a new technology to the inhabitants of Star Trek. I think that had been around.
Certainly, they didn't treat it with any special wonderment that
Not necessarily.
we certainly would put in that environment.
Right. I think it was their reaction to it was more of a display to the audience, more of like a breaking of the third wall, and ultimately to see look at this amazing technology, but for them to more or less understand that that's a given technology, that it's been around for a long time.
It gives it the used future concept, if you think about it. Like, it's been there, been around. They don't see it as being like, oh, wow,
correct,
look at this. They just like, oh, holodeck, yep. I'm just
and it doesn't appear in every starship. Some starships have the room. Some starships have the capacity, the computing power. Some starships have the energy power. But I don't think that every starship has one of these.
Probably only the deep exploration ships where it's a quality of life issue.
Correct. Where there's the ability to have an entertainment source other than what a general starship can provide. Obviously, their reliance on technological entertainment is not as strong as I would think even our society is. They rely a lot on human interaction. Theater is still a thing. Musical endeavors are still a thing. Realistic musical endeavors with actual instruments. Not everything needs to be created electronically for them to be entertained by it.
You would almost think there'd probably be a premium on firsthand experiences, whereas you can experience anything rendered perfectly that has been recorded. If you were the first person there, that suddenly has vastly more significance.
Correct.
Fair enough.
And ultimately, there's something that really hasn't been spoken of even in Star Trek, I think, is the ability to relive past historical events or to study them. I think that would be something that would be of value in the Star Trek realm, is to be able to use it more for that kind of educational and theoretical study rather than entertainment. When you're talking about the military or governmental aspect of it. But in terms of everybody else, yeah, it would just be an entertainment thing. It would just be hey, let's go climbing. Hey, let's do Shakespeare for an hour.
I don't know if I'm convinced with that, but we'll keep exploring that. Now, do either of you know, is there anything that you can't do in a holodeck? Anything that is outright impossible to do, or anything that is outright forbidden to do?
Would you say that the holographic images of people cannot come out of the holodeck?
Correct. Most of those are so high in terms of data and how it's being created that those would almost certainly be holographic only and not replicated.
And the second they walk out, they would disappear.
They would dissipate because
unless there's some sort of holographic projector continuing to propagate.
Well,
correct. Which they've discussed that too. There's mobile emitters.
Voyager had that.
You're just moving on technology wise. We're not ready to take that step with this, but
what we're saying is that I believe that there would be a limitation into how much the actual AI of the computer can create in terms of relative sentience. That being said, they've done it before. So there's nothing to prevent them from doing it again. I think it's more of a taboo type thing than necessarily a restriction on the technology. I do believe it's capable of creating a thinking AI. I mean, certainly the computer is a thinking AI as it is. So to be able to transfer that into an extension of the computer inside of a holographic being, I don't know that it would be generated separate from the computer or if it would just be an extension of the computer.
That's kind of a scary thought that this computer can infinitely propagate more artificial intelligence.
Correct, and I think that's again, the world of Star Trek, it places so much importance on human interaction that I think the possibility of creating technological life in that would be regulated and kind of...
Oh, I would think it would have to be hard baked in. Basically a block that stops the computer from ever really entertaining that idea.
Correct.
Unless it's somehow given an override by somebody superior. I think the example was it created an artificial intelligence in Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes. That was done by Picard, who is kind of the top guy in charge, isn't it?
No, it was actually Geordi.
It was Geordi. It was a
chief engineer also.
Correct. Geordi asks the computer to create an adversary for Data. Obviously, Data is a piece of remarkable AI engineering, and the computer recognizes that, thus having to create somebody with an even greater artificial intelligence.
Because when Data walked into the first Sherlock Holmes they did, he's just like, from the beginning, it was that guy who did it because of this and that and that and this, and it just ruined the fun.
Basically, he did all the Sherlock Holmes without needing to go through the experimentation, the investigation.
It's like playing Halo with a guy who plays Halo 24/7.
Sure.
You're gone. You don't even get a chance to walk or respawn because that little son of a...
Or it's playing Final Fantasy with already having read the guide and memorized it, knowing exactly what you're supposed to do.
Well, that's the thing. Data had read all of the books, so they couldn't surprise him unless they created something completely new.
The computer had shuffled bits and pieces of different Sherlock Holmes mysteries, and he still was able to see through that.
Sure.
Ultimately, Moriarty was created as a competitive adversary. for Data's Sherlock Holmes, which I would think would exceed its programming. And I think even at that time, it kind of referenced that it's a difficult thing to do for the computer to do that. And in order for the computer to create that, I think it kind of hiccuped.
So some guy taking a shower down in deck 37 suddenly was, my water's cold, stupid Data. Having to
Basically,
soak up all the power.
I can imagine something like that happen, or all of a sudden tomato soup comes out.
All right. Okay, so we've kind of gone over what can be done, what can't be done with a holodeck. Now let's talk about some of the different uses that we might apply holodeck technology to today. Let's just step aside from entertainment for the moment. That's mostly what we've been talking about. But I do like to think that there are a number of legitimate uses outside of entertainment, and I think Star Trek, the universe, probably uses a number of these as well. We've already talked about engineering, the ability to explore minute and intricate devices and manipulate without having to actually have the physical construct. We've seen kind of a longing for that technology in things like, Iron Man, where you watch holographic displays going up and things like that. So we're not going to touch on that. Education in Star Trek. I mean, obviously you have transporters and things, field trips become, real interesting. It's not just going down to the planetarium. It's poof, you're there. But also, wouldn't something like holotech technology, be useful for, creating just about any environment and being able to have a field trip, but stay with your feet right in your hometown? Is that something
that's certainly within the realm of reason? I would think so. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I could imagine if this were going today, you could go to. You could even go to like Disneyland, but you're still in like your hometown there and exploring that. Or you could go to other countries and explore those
other
things.
Planets without actually leaving your.
Probably pretty safe to say anything that we can do on the internet just becomes more of that when you plug in a holodeck. So we have Google Earth. So on a holodeck, you could go anywhere on Earth, walking, driving, creating the coolest car, whatever you want, however you want to do it, and boom, you're there, and that's working as long as you're in the holodeck. So education, engineering, scientific research. Obviously, the AI super advanced, so you can start coming up with theoretical models that the computer can replicate and be able to manipulate it in that environment, but completely safely. No dangers of, poisonings, getting bits sliced off, radiation, anything like that.
Well,
again, that's engineering, testing ultimately different outcomes of certain variances, whatever you input, without the risk of death, without the risk of...
But you could turn the safety off.
But you can turn the safety off, yes. Thank you for pointing that out.
So you could... do all that stuff, like, let's say where we're working, we're just doing, like, various engineering on this new particular process of something. Mm-hmm. Well, you could do a holodeck of that, save a lot of money and, let's say, scrap. Mm-hmm. But let's say you turn the safety protocols off and you go inside doing the thing in the machine, and the next thing you know, whoop, oh shoot, you lost a hand. Oh crap.
Although if the AI is sufficiently advanced that could recognize the threat and stop that before it happens,
correct.
You've got incredible levels of computing, manipulation, transporter technology, and all this other stuff going on. Even the safety's off is probably still fairly safe.
Well, when the script says so, it's not safe.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. That's completely fair. Is it safe to say that if we're assuming the technology, we're also assuming that the AI is there and that under normal circumstances, it is completely safe, though, right?
Under normal circumstances, yes.
Okay, so that's what we're assuming here with this. Okay, social interaction and social media. Now, if you think about the number of games that people play exclusively online where you don't know the other person, and I just got finished watching Ready Player One, and that's VR, not holodeck, but it's awfully close. With the haptic suits giving physical feedback, the omnidirectional treadmill so that you can stay in one spot, the glasses and everything, the gloves. It's about as close to holodeck technology as realistically we can come to. And what do people do as soon as they have that? They create a space where everybody can go online and be whatever they want and do whatever they want. The Oasis. Wouldn't most of what we see in holodecks, though, it's a personal experience. Is mostly what we've seen. But theoretically, say, I'm on the Enterprise. I'm a lieutenant. I'm on the Enterprise. We've been out in space for 3 years. My wife just had a baby. I'm sure, I would think, that I could get some furlough time to go into the holodeck and be there with my wife having her baby. Social interaction in a holodeck media. Is that possible? And if not, why?
So you're saying that your wife is not with you on this mission?
Correct.
So who's the father of the baby?
Exactly. Shoot. I had some time off. Oh boy. Okay.
No, but I was curious about that too. Like,
fair enough. Wow.
Well, here's the thing. And
it's a very open family.
Star Trek, the holodeck showed up before online game was a thing. You know what I mean?
Right. And I don't know that I have ever seen holodecks used in a network
Voyager to Enterprise
fashion.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what it would be like in our day, our society. If there's holodecks, you're darn right there's going to be people who are going to want to do that kind of stuff.
Well, if you're going to do Halo,
sure.
You could do Halo, where you're in your own room,
mm-hmm.
and then you're playing with other players that are in their own room.
Yep.
Where, but can you imagine the lag, though?
Well, we have to assume massive amounts of computing again.
Right.
No, Scotty has invented transdimensional warp. No, not transwarp.
Transwarp beaming.
We're just picking up one technology at a time. Yeah. We could talk about all the other ones. But in our society, that would be privatized. So there would be private computers dedicated to entertainment media.
Right, you have servers. Right.
So something like that would be possible to plug in and play with, people all over and be in that kind of experience.
I definitely think that that's how they would make it profitable, is to be able to have that interaction with people all over the world.
Sure.
To be able to go into your room and interact with those people. That being said, over the distances of, say, the planet Earth,
sure.
Yeah, I think that would be something that could be capable. I mean, certainly we have internet gaming,
yep.
Which has gone leaps and bounds over the last even 20 years. I would imagine that it's theoretically possible in the Star Trek universe. I just don't know that we've seen that. Again, and this may be indicative of our society versus what Star Trek postulates our society could become.
Mm-hmm.
In Star Trek, there's a very high degree of wanting that human interaction,
mm-hmm.
that non-technological interaction, whereas our society is characterized by almost
privacy. We want privacy. We want to explore things on our own in our own way.
Well, it's not just that, but we like to hide behind our screens.
Yes.
We're committing something that, we say is interaction with other people because there are other people on the other screens, but I don't know that that is interaction per se.
So do you think the whole concept of even social media kind of breaks down in a holodeck type environment?
I think that you even further remove people from that personal interaction if you do that. I'm at a loss to think of the movie. There's a Bruce Willis movie where people who don't fit the norm of society are able to put themselves into bodies of a different type in order to interact in public.
Yeah, sure. I don't remember the movie either.
Surrogates?
I don't even know.
I believe it was Surrogates,
about.
something like that. And I think there would be this, when you're creating avatars,
mm-hmm.
a lot of people create avatars to make them seem, to accentuate a certain part of themselves or to minimize a certain part of themselves that they wish to kind of take themselves away. I think with holodeck technology, what you would do is you would create that situation where are you really getting to know people or are you getting to know a fictional person created for that purpose?
Which gets addressed a lot in science fiction. Ready Player One is a good example where the main character, Wade, falls in love with a character that is just the avatar. Could be played by some 300-pound dude named Chuck.
You don't know. You don't know who is behind the mask.
So, okay, well, that's certainly, and again, it's an amplification of what we already have right now in our interactions on the internet, just
a more visual representation, more tactile.
That also would be designed for people who might actually like the story mode of a game. You know, that's still a thing today. If you look at Battlefront that came out for the PS4 and Xbox, one of the main complaints about that game was there was no story mode.
Right.
Which some people, I want to play online, but you know what? Sometimes I want to step back from
and that
online.
Goes to what you were saying with having a personal experience, with having a more personal experience. To be able to place yourself as the character of a novel, or to put yourself in the plane that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima, or being the captain of a sailing vessel in the 1600s.
Which is more of the traditional role of the holodeck in the Star Trek universe.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, I'm going to make a prediction here. If any show is going to bring back the holodecks, and then they're going to try the online aspect of it, it's probably going to be that new Picard show, because that's going to take place in the future after like Star Trek.
I think ultimately,
whatever.
to be honest with you,
I'll go a step further. I'd be completely happy with the Star Trek movie that doesn't leave the holodeck. Think about that. All the infinite possibilities that you could go exploring. It's all comes down to characters, and it could be like Quantum Leap in Star Trek.
Well, we had that.
They're constantly a different.
I think what we're talking about when we look at Star Trek, a lot of the time those are the upper echelon of society. I think that given our ability to pervert the use of technology, that the dregs of society would be the visual aspect of how this technology would be used. People who abuse the technology, people who take it to the extreme, people that use it for nefarious purposes, people who use it for self-destructive purposes, I think would be more commonplace in this society, being as we're still trying to figure out how to use our smartphones. We're still trying to figure out how all these technologies work.
We're still trying to get around not being prejudiced against our own species.
I don't see us as a technologically mature species. I think we're maturing technologically faster than we can handle.
Sociologically.
Correct. It's if you look at, you're walking down the street and you see all these people that are having their heads down in their phones, they're next to people and they're not interacting with each other. Again, the need for personal interaction is tantamount to all this technology.
Interesting thing, they obviously have technological capabilities of tablets and smartphones in Star Trek, but you'd never see anybody with one.
Don't we kind of see people with tablets?
Tablets, yeah. Well, they use
doing work.
A tool for which they use work.
Right.
I've seen people play video games on it, and Star Trek, yeah, that happens. But that's the exception rather than the norm.
Well, no.
The emphasis is placed on, and I'll turn back to this over and over again, the emphasis in Star Trek is placed on personal interaction and personal experience, making this a secondary entertainment form and not something that is, glorified, much like the video gaming society that it is today. People place a lot of importance on video gaming because that's just the way the society has gone.
Which is what we're discussing, is the dichotomy of the Star Trek society to ours, clearly. Other legitimate uses, therapy. One of the things that really impressed me in Ready Player One was Halliday, the creator of the Oasis, was a man with mental issues. They tastefully didn't go exploring that to try to get to the root of his issues, but it was front and center that this was a kind of a therapy for him, a way of reaching out
with the memory recreation and that.
Yeah, and so that's another legitimate thing that the holodeck could really do is in a controlled and safe setting, help people work through their issues and things like that. And goodness knows we have enough people in our society who could really use something like this. That could be a revolutionary thing that this technology could really help us out, I think. Legal. Incarceration. If you don't need to have prisons, but you can have somebody in a holodeck where their needs are taken care of, but they're no danger to anybody and they can't get out. Is that legitimate?
And Deep Space Nine, O'Brien, what was that?
That was memory implantation.
That was memory implantation?
Something similar to that. It was not holographic in nature.
Did anybody have a holographic prison? That almost seemed like a waste of energy.
Possibly. It depends on how much you do, though. I mean,
you can have Insurrection, they had an entire ship that was one big holodeck, and they were able to recreate basically the entire village. I wonder if in that situation. But again, in Star Trek, they tend to value rehabilitation over incarceration.
But we're talking about privatizing this technology in our modern society, which is really the only way it would come out, would be privatized pretty much. Or, if the government ever got a hold of it, if they could find a way to make it cheaper to put somebody into a holodeck type prison rather than guards, have real estate where you've got them in a
This is
cage.
what the government would do with a holographic prison. For one, the person wouldn't know that they're in a hologram at first.
Sure.
They would try to manipulate it in a way where they could get information from the person.
You could study their behavioral patterns in, again, a safe setting. Wow, he just went and blew up a bus full of children. Wow, this guy is really sick.
So
it's a good thing he's stuck
technically
here.
it would be used as a rehabilitation thing.
Exactly.
Because they could get to the root of their psychosis.
Yes.
I can see that.
Okay,
Yes.
now I get that.
I can see that.
You could also use it in a penal sort of way. Again, Ready Player One, the Loyalty Center, where you're stuck doing things like, moving bombs in artificial space and stuff like that. Is there the chance you think that would be used in a punitive fashion, using the holodeck and weaponizing it, or at least using it to punish people?
Well, I definitely think that, if it's a technology, we'll figure out how to weaponize it pretty quickly after it's been created. I think more so, though, that it would be used in a legal setting to where they could recreate crime scenes for the jury. That's actually been explored in Star Trek, where they've recreated the setting of a murder for the purpose of determining through...
Was that the Brad Dorff episode, Voyager?
I don't remember. I don't remember if that's not the one I'm talking about. The one I'm talking about is Riker was accused of killing somebody, and they were able to recreate the setting to which he had supposedly killed the scientist, and they determined that Riker had not killed that person. But to be able to recreate that setting is at least even in our time, I think would be important to be able to recreate the possibility of what happened. Granted, we do that at a two-dimensional kind of rendering nowadays, but to be able to be there in the moment would definitely be something.
If I recall, though,
worthwhile.
That episode, did they not have like a defense and a prosecution version of the scenario? So you had like nice Riker being all normal Riker, and then you had the defense version of Riker being
you
like
could you would program different possibilities.
So in a way, it's still like
to postulate how this would have happened.
Yeah.
Well, you're basically using the heuristic processing to project your case, and since it wasn't a recorded act, the computer could only postulate.
Correct, based on the input.
Yeah. Check back soon for our second segment of Holodecks Today with Danger Dave, myself, Rob Omnisci, and our Trexpert Neil in Back to the Podcast.